Welcome to the Authority File, the academic library podcast from Choice. Choice is a publishing division of the ACRL and the publisher of Choice Reviews and CC Advisor. This episode is brought to you by Sage Publishing. I'm Bill Mickey, the host of the podcast and the editorial director at Choice, and for this 4-episode series, my guests and I discuss essential strategies for not only measuring ROI, or return on investment, but the fundamental principles of displaying that data in a visually appealing way. Academic libraries are increasingly tasked with measuring all kinds of data to justify expenditures across the department, whether for collection development, outreach, or for demonstrating the library's contribution to student success and its value within the institution. In this 3rd episode, our guests and I talk about qualitative and quantitative data, how these two kinds of data are different and when they're most effectively measured. My guests are Dr. Carol Tenopir, Chancellor's Professor at the School of Information Sciences at the University of Tennessee, Dr. Stephanie Evergreen, an internationally recognized data visualization and design expert who regularly conducts keynote presentations and workshops and is the author of 2 books, Effective Data Visualization and Presenting Data Effectively, Communicating Your Findings for Maximum Impact, which is now in its 2nd edition. Also joining us is Kristen Tepfer, Executive Marketing Manager at Sage Publishing and the Global Head of the Data Evidence and Reporting Team in Library Marketing. All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about data more specifically, especially the sort of qualitative and quantitative kinds of data that librarians are collecting. And Kristen, I'll start with you. And when you're talking with librarians, I'm wondering what sorts of difficulties you're hearing from them in terms of what they're facing with their data and using it to justify their existence internally and externally within the institution.
Yeah, so what we've heard when we've had conversations with librarians, and actually a lot of more requests are coming for things like this, but measuring student success and
Yeah.
finding the right data to help determine if a library and a faculty member are succeeding in that is kind of a challenge. An interesting, I guess, another example of an interesting way that I thought a librarian mentioned that she could use the faculty contributor information that we shared with her
Mm-hmm.
to kind of show this student success. I provided her some article and book authors that were on her campus that were publishing with us, and she wanted to pass that information on to her faculty to use to mentor students. So students are also being pushed to publish before they graduate. And so seeing their professors' publications might be a good motivator for them to get themselves published as well and kind of give a good example. And another way that someone creatively used our data was they wanted to show visually what they had bought and how it was being used, and then comparing that to the student enrollments in that intended area for that research to be used. And she mentioned that the importance. She also mentioned the importance of helping with the student success and drawing out data for that. So she was able, with this information, to show that they had in fact divided their budget in the right way to service students. So those are maybe some external ways, just outside of the library that
Right.
they've used data to justify. But maybe even an internal example would be, I was speaking with a collection development librarian that said when she received the customer value report, she felt like it was just the ammo, she said, that she needed to justify for her subject librarians why as a collection development librarian that she had made certain purchase decisions. And so because the data was clear, it didn't leave an opening for many questions as to why this was a valuable resource. So those are just a few examples of ways that internally, externally, we're trying to help draw in on those pieces of data. But I would say, though, that I think Carol was kind of mentioning it before. Just some of the data it's hard to see really what impact it's having on the students and their graduation rates and things like that, and trying to kind of tie that back to one piece of data can be a bit challenging.
Right, exactly. And then, so Dr. Tenopir, I mean, how would you follow on to that? I mean, for a while now, we've been talking about number crunching sorts of topics. In our previous conversation, you mentioned that you frequently point out to librarians that they have two sorts of data available to them, quantitative and qualitative. I'm wondering if you can help us define those terms and then, give us a sense of what sorts of data a library might be collecting that fits into each of those categories.
Yeah, and of course they have to collect both. Let me echo
Yeah.
the supporting success, because we've done interviews with provosts, chancellors, presidents, and we hear over and over again that what they want from the academic library is supporting success. How does a library help attract and recruit high quality doctoral students, and retain and support the top faculty, scholars? How do they help students with graduation success? So that's kind of the holy grail
Right.
of demonstrating value or return on investment. And
Hmm.
some of it you can do with quantitative data. If working with the Student Success Center, looking at first year retention rates, or 5 or 6 year graduation rates, and looking at um, patterns of use of library. You got to be a little careful on privacy concerns, but
Exactly.
if you can do that with student success centers, those have worked really well. But sometimes it's really got to be a combination of qualitative, not the numbers that come from amount of use, or gate counts, or any of those kind of quantitative things, which can show how much departments or people or subjects are using the library in
Yeah.
general. But sometimes you have to get testimonials, and this kind of qualitative stories speak very well to some. It depends on your audience, but to some presidents and provosts, they want to see the testimonials, the stories, the kind of evidence that shows their high achieving faculty, how the library has supported them, why they came to this university, and why they stay at the university. And so that kind of qualitative information that can come from interviews, it can come from gathering testimonials, it can come from open-ended questions in surveys. It puts a personal face, if you will, on the
Hmm.
value of the library. It's not quantitative. You can't look at a strict ROI, but you can get a sense of that inherent value to helping support success. So we've had a lot of success, if you will. We've had a lot of luck with creating what we call portraits of success, taking the quantitative data, which is the highest, looking at survey data from the high achieving faculty who publish a lot, for example, and then kind of looking their characteristics of library use, or
Okay.
getting testimonials from them, and you can get a really nice view of what the library role is in the mission of the university.
Excellent. So, do you have any recommendations in terms of the kind of rigor you might apply to the actual collection of that uh, um, qualitative data, the testimonials, as you say? Like,
Yeah,
how?
qualitative data is tricky, of
Yeah.
course, because you can't generalize, and so you're not trying to generalize. You're trying to show snapshots, or to, as I say, tell stories. So
Hmm.
it doesn't speak to every university president. If your university president is an economist or an engineer or something, it may not speak as much of that person, but it shows a human side, if you
Yeah.
will, and
Hmm.
it shows that not every value, not every use is equal. And
Hmm.
let me give you one other example. Pop-up surveys you can use sometimes too, for special collections, for example. When somebody uses a photograph collection or a special collection, digital collection, you can have a pop-up survey. Again, you don't know, not everybody will be answers, so you can't generalize, but we found here at the University of Tennessee through that a one user of the photograph collection of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, it happened to be Ken Burns' team that was using the photos the for his national parks survey, national parks series a few
Hmm.
years ago. So that
Right.
one value um, brought renown, if you will, to that collection. So it was something that spoke to the marketing, the development people. We are providing a wonderful service that reaches millions of people secondarily through this. So those are the kinds of things: pop-up surveys, interviews, testimonials that can be used to, in a sense, to bring human side to the numbers.
Okay. But then I was kind of curious about how, if you had any insight into actually crafting that part of the surveys, the more qualitative part of the survey, in terms of how you're structuring the questions that you're asking, or how you're framing, um, the questions in terms of the feedback you're wanting to get from the respondents. Um, are there any tips or tricks in that kind of sort of the constructing part of that part of the survey?
Yeah, there are probably two ways. One, if you're combining a quantitative approach with a qualitative approach, you can ask questions of individuals about their productivity. This is how
Hmm.
we get to that portraits of success. We can take the people who publish the most or who have won awards.
Yep.
Then we can look at their characteristics. So that's a quantitative approach, but we make it. You can make it. Again, by making a persona, you kind of make it a personal approach. But after that, a follow up, two ways that we do. One is an open ended questions that ask them, what has the library, it's kind of, what has the library done for you lately? Not exactly in those words, but tell us, how the last time you used the library,
Right.
what did you do it for, and what did you use it for? So we like to use the critical incident. So you get to, again, a qualitative, the last time or the most important time. This is how it saved me time. This is what came out of it. Um, the the most important time, I was able to finish my book. I was able to, attract a visiting scholar here because of our collection. Those kinds of things you can really get with that critical incident technique, which can
Hmm.
be done at the end of a survey, or you can ask folks if they're willing to be interviewed at the end of a survey, and then you can elicit that kind of thing through a personal interview. Either
Okay.
way, so
Right.
that way you have both quantitative and qualitative.
Exactly. Okay. Kristen, does your team collect and report qualitative data?
I mean, we really report mostly on quantitative data, I would say. I mean,
Yeah.
we do
Okay.
explore a bit with case studies and things that we like to pass on to different libraries, how another library might be using one of our products, but mostly we stick to quantitative data, how much, how often, and things like that. But we do struggle trying to help, like I said, librarians to understand um, how data is positively impacting student success. I mean, that's where I think Carol's making a really good point that, there's so many kind of unseen variables. And so you have to be really creative to make those connections, which from a publisher standpoint, we don't really have that kind of as much of that insight. So
Right.
we do try to look for more of those kind of hard facts to somewhat make a correlation to this piece of research is being used heavily, and maybe we can somewhat tie that back to how many students have graduated in this area that would have come across that research, and maybe there's some connections there, but it's all a little bit loose in some of those areas, so that's a bit of a struggle for us.
Right. Okay. No, I totally understand. So, Dr. Evergreen, are there basic principles or best practices that you can share for working with the qualitative side of data, and then making an argument with it? Are there charts one can create using qualitative data? And
Yeah.
if so, how might you go about making visuals from that?
Yeah, there are actually, and I don't think this area is as well developed as quantitative data visualization, but there certainly are ways that you can visualize qualitative data. Um, I think the typical thing we see people do is just give a list of quotes, and that's not visual, and that's really difficult for people to process. So
Right.
anything but that. So folks will go then, I think, next to a word cloud, which also isn't really a very effective visual because it doesn't give you any kind of insight. Generally speaking, we want to follow the same process so that we begin with our point. We begin with a title that tells people something meaningful about the data, and then we come up with a visual that will support it. And it's a little hard to describe these in a podcast setting, but I'll tell you about one that that I saw that was actually from an article about a library. It's a diagram called a spectrum display. And it was initially introduced to the world, as far as I can track back, in a journal article published in like 1986. And this study had observed the first time a library, this is the public library, got a computer lab installed where patrons could borrow time on the computer. Remember when these things became really popular in the 80s?
Yeah.
And so they wanted to see how the patrons were spending their time on these computers. So they did an observational study and they displayed this data in this spectrum display. So imagine like a half circle, and the inner portions were broken out into sections that were based on how long they spent there. So one section was like less than 16 minutes. The next section is like 16 to 24 minutes and so on. And then they had like the half circle, they had rings inside there that were the themes, the things that they saw people doing, your themes of your analysis, so to speak. So they saw people doing things like sign up to pay bills. They saw people doing things like check an email or applying for jobs, so they had these things kind of broken out. And then it was further broken out by each patron. So you could see, patron 16 was there for between 16 and 24 minutes and spent that time checking emails and applying for jobs. And so it gave you like all this data about how people spent their time in the library in one compact visual. And it might be hard to imagine it if you haven't seen one before, especially if I'm just describing it to you. But as soon as you see it, you're like, oh, I can totally read that. Makes so much sense. And so you pair that with a title that gives people some kind of insights, and then you have a qualitative way to show maybe how the research is being used at your university or any number of
Right.
qualitative applications.
So you're kind of looking for quantitative patterns, I guess, in the qualitative data. Is that one way to put it, I suppose?
I mean, I guess so. I mean, when we're talking about qualitative stuff, there's always the spectrum of how much people are comfortable quantifying that data and how much they need to keep it purely qualitative. In the book you mentioned, my second edition of Effective Data Visualization, we have a whole chapter on qualitative visualization, and it's broken out into whether you're comfortable quantifying or whether you're not. So you've got options all along that spectrum.
You just heard from Carol Tenopir, Stephanie Evergreen, and Kristen Tepfer. This concludes the third of our four-part series on how academic libraries can effectively track and present ROI data. This episode was brought to you by Sage Publishing. Be sure to join us for the final episode in this series when we'll talk about the specific trends in academic library data collection.
Yeah, what I've really seen is over the last 10 or 15 years is a change of a focus from inward looking, using data to make collection decisions, using data like gate count data to do staffing decisions, all that inward, to the more outward looking. So what does the data tell us about value?
Find all of the episodes of The Authority File on your favorite podcast app or on our website, choice360.org. Just click on the librarianship dropdown. On choice360.org, you'll also find information on Choice's entire product platform, including Choice Reviews, CC Advisor, Choice Webinars, resources for college libraries, our white papers, and a whole lot more. A great way to keep up with the Authority File is to join the Choice Authority File Facebook group, which you can access via the Choice Reviews Facebook page. As a member of the group, you can give us feedback, suggest podcast participants, chat with other listeners, and submit new topic ideas. Sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's digital media specialist, Mark Dirks. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.